What if landing at an airport meant banking your plane at 47 degrees, tilted like a roller coaster straight through the middle of a crowded city? That was not a movie scene. That was a Tuesday afternoon in Hong Kong. Imagine sitting in an airplane, your face pressed against the window, and instead of seeing the sky, you see apartment buildings rushing past, close enough to spot laundry hanging on balconies and people staring back at you in disbelief. For decades, this was the everyday reality for millions of passengers arriving at Kai Tak International Airport. Pilots had to execute one of the most technically demanding maneuvers in commercial aviation history, a steep, hand-flown descending turn directly above one of the world's most densely populated urban landscapes, guided in the final seconds by nothing but a painted checkerboard on a hillside. No other airport on Earth asked so much of the pilots who served it, or of the communities forced to live beneath it. A mistake that made history. Here is a fact that might surprise you. One of the world's busiest international airports was never actually designed to be an airport at all. The story of Kai Tak begins in 1925 with two businessmen, Sir Ho Kai and Mr. Otak, who had grand dreams of building a luxury housing estate on reclaimed land along Victoria Harbour. The project collapsed spectacularly. Both men went bankrupt, and the government took possession of the land. Combining their names, Kai and Tak, colonial authorities converted the abandoned plot into a modest grass airstrip for a local flying club. Nobody at the time could have imagined that this humble mistake would one day become the third busiest international passenger airport on the planet. War, walls, and concrete runways. When war arrived in Hong Kong in 1941, the sleepy little airstrip was about to undergo a dramatic and brutal transformation. Japanese forces occupied Hong Kong and immediately recognized the strategic value of the Kai Tak airfield. They needed a military-grade airbase, and they needed it fast. Tragically, prisoners of war were forced to build the first concrete runways under harsh conditions. To gather enough stone and material, Japanese engineers demolished ancient villages and tore down the historic walls of the Kowloon walled city, one of the most densely inhabited places in human history. When British administration returned after the war, the city surrounding Kai Tak began to grow at an astonishing rate, with refugees flooding in and manufacturing industries exploding across the skyline. The city that swallowed the airport by the time the jet age arrived in the late 1950s and 1960s. Kai Tak was facing a problem that had never been seen before in aviation history. The city had literally grown around it. Skyscrapers shot up on every side of the airfield. High-rise apartment blocks stood just meters from the runway's edge. To the north loomed Lion Rock, a granite mountain rising 495 meters over 1,600 feet, making a straightened runway approach physically impossible. The airport did not move closer to the city. The city completely swallowed the airport whole. By the mid-1990s, Kai Tak was handling more than 450 flights per day on a single runway, a takeoff or landing every 2 to 3 minutes. Engineers and aviation authorities faced an extraordinary challenge. How do you safely operate one of Asia's most important international airports when the runway is surrounded by mountains on one side and dense urban development on all others? Engineering the impossible, the IGS approach. The solution they came up with was so unusual, so unlike anything else in commercial aviation, that pilots had to practice it specifically in flight simulators before they were ever allowed to attempt it with real passengers on board. Engineers developed a special instrument guidance system, the IGS, for runway 13 at Kai Tak. Unlike a standard instrument landing system that guides aircraft in a straight line to the runway, the Kai Tak IGS was deliberately offset by exactly 47 degrees. Pilots would follow this angled signal toward a massive orange and white checkerboard pattern painted on a hillside at Kowloon. At approximately 200 meters above the ground around the middle marker, pilots had to visually locate the checkerboard, disengage the autopilot, and manually execute a sharp descending right-hand turn to align with the runway. Many foreign airlines required their captains to complete a full simulator session before their first live attempt. Life under the flight path. Here is a striking statistic. The noise levels measured directly under the Kai Tak flight path regularly exceeded 100 decibels, roughly equivalent to standing next to a chainsaw for the residents of Kowloon City. The thundering roar of jet engines was simply the rhythm of daily life. Schools beneath the flight path were forced to pause lessons every time an aircraft came in for landing, sometimes every 2 to 3 minutes during peak hours. Television volumes went up, conversations stopped mid-sentence, children grew up doing homework to the soundtrack of low-flying jets rattling their windows. Some long-time residents developed such a familiarity with the sound that they could identify aircraft types by ear alone. The high-pitched whine of a Hawker Siddeley Trident versus the deep, rumbling growl of a Boeing 747. Passengers on the right side of approaching aircraft could look straight down into the streets and see faces looking back up at them from apartment windows. Typhoons, near misses, and the limits of human skill in November 1993. During Typhoon Ira, a China Airlines Boeing 747 touched down too far along the runway, and at 400 tons, it simply could not stop in time. Kai Tak was not just challenging on a clear day. Hong Kong is one of the most typhoon-prone cities in the world, and when storms struck, Lion Rock would create powerful wind shear, sudden, violent shifts in wind direction that could push an aircraft off course in seconds. Pilots used a technique called crabbing, flying with the aircraft's nose pointed toward the apartment buildings while the body moved laterally toward the runway. The proximity warning systems in cockpits designed to scream pull up near the ground triggered on virtually every single approach at Kai Tak. Pilots were specifically trained to ignore them. The 1993 China Airlines incident ended with the aircraft sliding off the runway into Victoria Harbour. Remarkably, all 396 people on board survived the final flight and what came next. On the night of July 5, 1998, something extraordinary happened. Minus 1,200 vehicles moved an entire international airport, 30 kilometers across one of the world's most congested cities, in just 6 hours. Kai Tak handled its last commercial flight that evening, and by dawn, the new Czech Lapkov airport, built on a flattened island reclaimed from the sea, was already receiving its first arrivals. The transition was the largest logistics operation in aviation history, 1,200 vehicles, thousands of workers, and a complete switchover with no overlap period. But the opening night was not without drama. The new airport's main computer crashed at 2:30 in the morning, leaving engineers scrambling to hot patch systems before the first scheduled flights arrived just hours later. Somehow, they pulled it off. The checkerboard remained on the hillside, slowly fading under years of sun and rain. Today, Kai Tak is a public park and cruise terminal. The new airport is an engineering marvel, but one still fighting its own battle. As the artificial island gradually sinks centimeters each year into the soft ocean floor beneath it, requiring engineers to constantly monitor the runways for cracks and settlement. History, it turns out, does not stop repeating itself. Hong Kong has always been about forcing concrete into places it does not belong, first between skyscrapers, then into the sea. If you enjoyed this journey through aviation history, we would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Have you ever flown into the old Kai Tak? What do you think about airports built in impossible places? If you found this story fascinating, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the World Documentaries, and share this video with someone who loves incredible history. Every week we explore the most extraordinary places, decisions, and human stories from around the globe, and we want you to be part of the conversation. Tell us in the comments which impossible engineering challenge do you want us to explore next.